Hi, I'm Guy Powell, and welcome to the next episode of the backstory on the Shroud of Turin. If you haven't already done so, please visit guypowell.com and sign up for more episodes. Today, we are talking with Myra Kahn Adams, and she is the founder of a major new initiative called the National Shroud of Turin exhibit. This alone is a reason to visit Washington, D.C., and it promises to really be a bucket list item for Christians and historians alike. I am the author of the newly released #1 best-selling book, and here it is. I finally got my own print copy, The Only Witness, A History of the Shroud of Turin. It is a historical fiction tracing a possible yet plausible history of the Shroud over the last 2 millennia. So let's get started. Let me tell you a little bit about Myra. She has been on my show a couple of times, and so so most of you already know her, but I'll just give you a brief background. She is leading a team of national and international Shroud of Turin experts to produce a permanent Shroud exhibit in Washington, D.C., and that alone is just an awesome thing. She's the executive director of signfromgod.org, which is a ministry that began in November 2017 to promote education about the Shroud of Turin. In May 2018, Myra tirelessly spearheaded the effort to convince the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. to host a high-tech exhibit about the Shroud that culminated in the opening of that exhibit in February 2022. So with that, Myra, thank you so much for being here and so glad to have you. So let's get started. So what's going on? You've got so much going on with the Shroud and with the National Shroud of Turin exhibit. Tell us what's going on.
Well, Guy, thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on your book, because your efforts are also compatible with what our organization is doing, which is to promote the Shroud, interest in the Shroud, and education about the facts of the Shroud, not the myth, the facts. So our group, National Shroud of Turin Exhibit.org, our goal is to produce a permanent high-tech Shroud exhibit in Washington, D.C. that is going to last, hopefully, forever. And once it gets started, we hope to find major funding that will keep it going in perpetuity. Because as we know, Washington, D.C. is a very unique city. It's a home of many exciting museums. And certainly we think that the Shroud of Turin is worthy of having an exhibit in Washington, D.C. that will interest people who live there, international visitors, political leaders, because there's nothing in the world like the Shroud of Turin, and why it is, to this day, the most studied artifact in the world. And that will continue until every mystery of the Shroud is solved, which we don't expect is going to happen for a while. As you know, Guy, the Shroud is filled with so many fascinating mysteries, which is why people just love the Shroud. And once they actually learn about it, it's one of those things where the more you learn, the more you want to learn, and the more you realize there's so much to learn. So
Yeah,
our exhibit is going to cover a lot of that.
that is so true, and I uh, I don't hate to say it, I love to say it that when I got interested in the Shroud, the interest in it definitely bit me, and I am now forever hooked, and will continue to try and learn more. And certainly my book coming out, and definitely all of the work that you're doing is so important to educating and help find others that want to learn more about the Shroud.
Well, we call them Shroudies. It's not a knock on groupies, but it basically is that people who love the Shroud. Why not call ourselves groupies and what Shroud groupies, but Shroudies? And I found that people love that name. We actually kind of tested that one time, and it turns out that people think that name is cute, and why not? The Shroud can have a fan club, and once I said, once you get interested in it, you can't stop getting interested in it. It's just absolutely fascinating. So what we're doing is, I said, trying to do a permanent exhibit. We have a long way to go. The exhibit is not there yet. It does not exist yet. But our group does have what we call our first It's a little exhibit. We have a replica of a life-size replica of the shroud at a very prestigious organization in Washington, D.C. called the Catholic Information Center. It's at 1501 K Street, Northwest Washington, D.C., just 2 blocks from the White House. And it's part of the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. It's a wonderful place. They have events there all the time. They have mass there every day at 12 noon. And they just, in fact, led May 20th. They had a big event that was led by Catholic Information Center, the first Eucharistic procession through the streets of Washington, D.C. And there were over about 500 people there, and it got a lot of press. And so CIC is a wonderful organization, and we have our replica there. And we give out a brochure that explains the shroud. We had our first opening event March 28th. We had a Supreme Court justice. I will not name who that was, but this is not, just keep that quiet. But we did have a Supreme Court justice sitting in the front row. So that was exciting, a washing kind of thing. But the main thing is that it's there for many months, at least 6 months, maybe even more. And the Catholic Information Center loves it being there, and they think it's to what they do. So we're honored and thrilled that our first exhibit is at Catholic Information Center, but we hope that eventually we will find the funding and the major donors, especially, that want to help us build a permanent exhibit that will just be there forever as part of the panoply of museums that give people reason to come to DC.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when one of the things about the exhibit at the Museum of the Bible was that the Shroud exhibit was their most visited exhibit. And I could imagine that now for the Catholic Information Center, it's got to be the same thing, in that the popularity of the Shroud is just enormous, and the desire for people to want to learn more about it has got to be enormous.
That is true. That's why they really like having it there. Keep in mind, they're not really a museum. I mean, they're a functioning organization. They have events there all the time. But so we're just there. We have a big wall with the exhibit. But it's our first footprint into Washington, D.C. to have actually say, this is what we're doing. We started our organization, and in December, when first on your show. And now, 6 months later, we have made headway that is just astounding. Besides trying to raise money and build this exhibit, we're of course looking for space. But our organization, National Shroud of Turin Exhibit, which is a part of signfromgod.org, which is established in 2017, that is an educational mission. And the educational component of what National Shroud of Turin Exhibit is doing, we are finding opportunities that makes us realize that the Lord's hand is on us, and he's propelling us. We have 3 opportunities that are coming up to promote Shroud of Turin education. The first one is this summer. It's in Lisbon, Portugal. It's called World Youth Day. And there will be hundreds of thousands of people there, including the Pope. And we will have an educational session there, and a presence there, and a booth. We'll have a selfie booth where people can take a photo negative with the shroud. It's all about educating younger people about the shroud. But World Youth Day is a really huge huge event. And so the fact that we have a presence there, it's August 1 through 6. And 2 of our organizational team members will be there, Nora Creech and Dr. Cheryl White, as long as one of our associates, Father Andrew Dalton, will also be speaking at the event that we will have going on there.
Well,
so that's the summer.
Yeah, I'm very jealous. I haven't been to Lisbon, and then to do something like that and be present with a couple of 100,000 people and youth, that is awesome. That's really good. Kudos to you.
400,000 have already registered. So it's going to be a huge national event that will get a lot of international press. The second event that we're doing is at the beginning of 2024. It's with the Fellowship of Catholic University Students called Focus. They have an annual conference called the Seek Focus, SEEK. That will be at the beginning of January in St. Louis. We're going to have a presence there. We're going to have a speaker. So again, National Shroud of Turin exhibit is getting its name out, particularly with younger people, because the focus, of course, as we know, is to educate the future. And the young people are the future, and to educate them about the shroud. So interest in the shroud will continue for many, many decades through the end of time, hopefully. So that opportunity to partner with Focus and to have a presence at the Seek conference, that's a huge thing for us. I give Nora Creech, one of our team members who you happen to know, all the credit. She's the one that's helped arrange all these things. We've had benefactors that are helping make it happen. But the fact that National Shroud of Turin exhibit is going to be a permanent exhibit in DC, but at the same time have all these other activities that we're going to be engaged in before we even have our permanent exhibit, to be able to get our name out and get our mission out about what we're doing, because education is our mission as well, on site and obviously off site. But finally, the other huge thing that's going to happen in 2024 is it's called the National Eucharistic Congress. And that will take place in Indianapolis, Indiana in July. And the dates are July 17th through 21st in 2024. And there will be at least 80,000 people there. And that's a big celebration of evangelism for the Catholic community, but it will be a huge event in the Catholic world. So we'll exhibit there, booth there, exhibit with speakers. So those three events, the fact that our organizations involved with those three events that are very significant in the Catholic infrastructure is just really great. But I do have to comment one thing. The shroud is not just for Catholics. Catholics tend to be very interested in the shroud. As a group, they're probably more interested than other groups. But the shroud itself is not Catholic by definition, because Jesus is not Catholic by definition. Jesus is for everybody. So I just thought
Well, Jesus was Jewish, so
yes, Jesus
he's
was
for all
Jewish.
of us. That's for
Right.
sure. And I'm a Protestant, and yet I've been bitten. And I don't know. I think to your point, the interest in the Protestant community is I think it's exploding, just like the Catholic community as well. It's exploding, but I think the Protestant community is growing and growing, maybe even faster, because it is so significant, and it is so mysterious. There are so many mysteries around it, and once you start to ask one question, then it uncovers another 1,000 questions.
That is really true. And I think that has to do with, as time goes on, the farther we get away from the 1988 carbon dating, which put a huge kibosh. I mean, Barry Schwartz, who runs Shroud.com, will tell you how when that came out in 1988, it just put a complete kibosh on interest in the shroud. All of a sudden, the shroud got labeled as a medieval forgery, end of story, everyone go home. Even though the Shroud of Turin research project had come up with just amazing discoveries. Of course, their bumper sticker line was, "This is not the product of an artist," and that they did their report in 1981, and the shroud exploded after that. But then 1988, when the carbon dating was so completely flawed and botched, but it got that again, bumper sticker, "This is a medieval forgery, nothing to see, folks. Everyone go home." And that really hurt the shroud. It hurt research, it hurt interest, it hurt the shroud so badly for so many decades. And now, the further we get away from that, and is how many times, particularly Kristen Tresabianca and the research that he did, completely negating that the 1988 conclusion that it was dated between 1260 and 1390 was just absurd. And now we have a renewed interest in it, because people are realizing the mysteries are just unexplainable, and it makes no sense that a medieval artist would be able to produce something, an unnamed medieval artist who only did one piece of art that defied logic. So you add it all up, and I believe that's why over time the shroud is coming into this Renaissance period.
Yeah, I think you're so right, and I think and again, the more that you understand it, and the more that you try and learn from the mysteries that are surrounding it, the more you'll realize that radiocarbon dating, the 1988 radiocarbon dating, really was a they use they use the words they faked it and flogged it because they thought it was a medieval forgery, or that was their conclusion, and yet they're the ones that faked it and flogged their conclusions. And as you mentioned, Tristan Casabianca, he's the one that really proved that they faked it and flogged their results. And to your point as well, when you talk to Barry with Shroud.com and some of the other lists and email newsletters that go out, they are exploding with new content and videos and papers and books and whatever. So you are so right. The interest overall in the Shroud is really taking on a whole new meaning and a whole new level of activity.
Right. And there's two parts of it that I think also are really important. One, it's not just for Catholics. And two, it's not just for Easter. Okay. Jesus is all year round. He's 24/7 in the world, in our lives and in our hearts and our souls. So the shroud also should be discussed every day of the year and thought about and learned about and contemplated every day of the year. And then, of course, as we said about the Catholics, it's certainly Catholics
Mm.
have a great interest in it, but I have also been on many Protestant radio shows or podcasts, TV shows, talking about the Shroud. So there is definitely a huge interest that is non-Catholic interest. And we hope to capitalize on all of that when we have our exhibit in Washington, D.C. And in fact, our working title for the exhibit is Shroud of Turin, the world's greatest mystery.
Mm.
And we'd like to make it as non-denominational as possible. Obviously, we'll probably have a lot of Catholic donors, but we hope to also have some non-Catholic donors too. But if it's going to be successful in Washington, D.C., it has to be non-denominational. And of course, it's going to talk about the Gospels and talk about the burial practices and talk about all the suffering Jesus went through. So it can't help but talk about Jesus. But it's not going to have a slant one way or another in terms of its labeling. But I say that now, but if we end up being totally funded by Catholics, it probably will have more of a Catholic slant to it. But I just think if it's going to be really successful, we need to have it be non-denominational
Mm.
as much as possible, just to achieve the objective of Shroud of Turin education and
Yeah.
keep those mysteries front in mind and have people walk away and say, wow, that is amazing. I'm going to start thinking about Jesus a little bit more now than I ever did before. And that's really what we want people to take away
Yeah.
with and to decide themselves whether or not, quote unquote, the man of the shroud is Jesus. I mean, we're not going to come out and say it's Jesus. They have to decide that for themselves. And that's centered around the question, that famous question that's always asked when you see the holy face, who do you say that I am? I love that question.
Yeah. No, and I think you're right. I think obviously there I mean the shroud itself it's owned by the Catholic Church and the Pope, but if you can reach out to a non-Catholic audience, not only a Protestant audience, but even a non-Christian audience, and potentially even bring some others to Christ through the shroud in any way, that's one of my missions for my book as well. Is I just want to convert one person, and if I can do that, then my book will have been a success. And so for you as well, it's not only to bring the shroud, but bring Christianity and the love of Christ to to people that actually view it and then realize that there's something more to this than meets the eye. So when you have your exhibit, what do you see? What do you want people to come away with? What is the one big thing that you want them to come away with when they finally when they're finally done with the exhibit?
Well, we want them to seek more information and to educate themselves about what the shroud is, what the mysteries are, why the mysteries are unexplained. I guess it's just a matter of it. It's hard to say a blanket what we want people to come away with. It's going to depend on what they walk in there with. You
Mm.
know, do they already believe in Christ? Are they atheists? Do they hate the Catholic Church? I mean, you just don't know what they walk in there with. But when they walk out, we just want people in general just to start their own seeking of information and education about what they saw. We just want them to be excited about what they saw and just really enthusiastic about finding out more, because that's, as we know, that's what
Mm.
happens. We do know that happens. People learn about it initially and then they're like, wow, I need to learn more about this. So that's really the objective. I mean, whether or not we convert people to loving Christ, it's an individual, it's just an individual situation. But the main thing is that we just want to present facts and the mystery and stick to as many facts as we can, and just have people just walk away and say, wow, what else could this possibly be
Mm.
if not who, most people believe in the shroud, believe it is the man of the shroud is Jesus. And have people walk away and say, what else could this be besides that, without actually coming out and saying it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I agree with that, and that makes so much sense. Because if you start to learn more about the shroud, then you are going to learn more about Christ and the Bible and what have you. And you don't have to do it in an evangelical or proselytizing way. It's really, and that's why I like your title as well, as what is this mystery, and get people to even start to really think about what that mystery is and what it can mean.
Right. Because when you say Shroud of Turin, world's greatest mystery, that's that's a pretty heavy duty title. Okay. I mean, there could be other great mysteries of the world, but I believe, and a lot of my folks believe, it is the world's greatest mystery, because it's about who we believe
Mm.
is pictured on that image of that man. We believe he is in fact Christ, but not everyone believes that, and certainly everyone's entitled to their own opinion. But we all know that when you, by process of elimination, we know it's a crucified man. We know he was in his early 30s. We know that he suffered terribly, and just coincidentally, all the marks of torture on his body just happen to mirror the Gospels. There's so much coincidence here, and the fact that this is always one of my great things that I hope will bring this out in the exhibit. The fact that the Shroud of Turin still exists, to me, is also, it really points to world's greatest mystery. How could this thing have survived all the fires and wars and hatred? And I would just give you one little example, which I just love. You know how when you look at the shroud, the marks, that it looks like the Japanese art origami, those marks that run parallel to
Hmm.
the image of the man, and people think that's part of the shroud. But those marks were left over from a fire in 1532, and drops of molten silver fell on the shroud. It was folded up in 48 layers. Imagine the shroud folded up in 48 layers. The shroud is over 14 feet long, 3 feet wide. So this is 48 layers folded up in a silver recularly, in a silver box, and little molten drops of silver hit the edges of that 48 layers. And the fact that molten silver, you think about how many thousands of degrees is molten silver, and the fact that it just didn't go poof, now that is a miracle. The fact it only just hit the edges there and created that origami looking, those designs that are part of the shroud to this day. And apparently in the 1500s, when that happened, people started thinking that this in fact had to be what many believed it was, because why would it not have just gone poof?
Mm.
Something that hot could have just, it should have, by all means, it should have just destroyed it right there. There's so
Yeah,
many of
absolutely.
those kind of mysteries, but
Yep.
why does it still exist?
Yeah,
It,
yeah. That sounds like a panel in your new exhibit coming up. Is how did it survive the Chambéry fire? Hey, Guy Powell here. Just wanted to cut in a second. We're going to take a short break on this video interview with Myra Kahn Adams on the backstory of the Shroud of Turin. We'll pick up the second half in about a week. And please look out for the second half. Otherwise, we're going to take a short break now. Thank you.